Welcome to the Q&A for the international premiere of Uprooted, The Journey of Jazz Dance. I'm your host, Danielle Capretti, and we're delighted to have several of the film's creative contributors here with us. Now, I'm going to hand over to the wonderful producer, Lisa, who's going to introduce this magnificent team to us.
Thank you, Danielle. So my name's Lisa Donmar-Reeve. I was the producer of Uprooted. I will start with the lovely Khadifa Wong, who was our director. And then we have Zach Nemerin. Zach was the original idea. He came up with the original idea of the film, and then he went to Khadifa, but he will tell that story later, I am sure. He also did some of the original choreography that you see in the film. We then have Matt Simpkins, who was our director of photography. And then last but not least, she's very important, she's the magician, is Joan Gill Amarin, and she's our editor.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Now, this Q&A will last about 30 minutes, the latter half of which I would love to be your questions to this wonderful team we have before us. So if you have a question, please pop it in the Q&A box on the lower right, not the chat box, but the Q&A box, and I'll be very happy to relay it to our panel. Let's start out with Zach, who originated the concept of this film. Why did it take until 2020 for this film to be made and to be helmed by British dance artists?
Oh my God, that's a really interesting question to ask. God, well, to start off with, the whole concept just came out of the fact that I went back to do a degree in my mid to late 30s. And I just suddenly realized that there wasn't actually enough information, in one kind of like space to pull from. So I decided, because I'd known Khadifa for such a long time, and I knew that she was filmmaking now, I was like, right, let's make a film about jazz dance, because that is it's my love. But yeah, no, why did it take until 2020? Wow, why did it take over 100 years plus from the jazz dance that we know? I have no idea, possibly because there's so much involved with the whole concept. Really, yeah, it's a big project to try and fit 400 years into an hour and a half. Really.
And why by British dance artists instead of American? I found that absolutely fascinating.
I think us three, the three that knew each other from London, we all just love jazz dance. I think it was just something that we grew up with, and we just kind of like fell in love with the whole concept from a younger age. And I think as Brits, we can actually take a step back because of all the political and social elements that, attribute and go along with jazz dance. So I think we're more able to kind of take a step back and listen more, because it maybe not be our country, maybe not be our experience, or maybe not be, and so we can just take a step back and listen to what everyone has to say, really, I think.
And on that note, Khadifa, this seems like an extremely daunting project. What gave you the courage to tackle it?
Oh gosh, the courage to tackle it. I think it was where we were in the world politically, and I had seen Brexit, and sorry, I'm going to get political for a moment. I'd seen Brexit, I'd seen Trump, and I felt like I had lost my voice. I'm really sorry. And so I knew that this was a way I could say what I wanted to say, but combine it with dance, which is what was my first love. So it was like returning home, and what better way to kind of find your voice than by going back to where everything started for you. And for me, my life as a creative person started as a dancer. And so there was a safety in that, and making it with one of my closest friends, with Zach. So there was immediately those kind of security nets that allowed you to kind of be a little bit risky. And then you find the right team that allow you then to kind of edge out onto the precipice. And working with everyone on this team, they allowed you, and we all worked together to kind of create something that was a little bit out there, but we all kind of had confidence in each other.
And Khadifa and Zach, in practice on set, what was your working relationship like? Did you have specific things that both of you did, or did it just meld into one another?
I think we had a lot of planning there was a lot of planning going on, and we I guess we kind of defined our roles organically, really, and then just worked together. So it was all just one kind of meshy kind of like process that spilled out, not just with me and Kadifa, but with Matt and Lisa and Joan. So it was really like this all the way through. And I think more voices are better than one, really.
Yeah. I think Zach's being a little modest because he did ask the questions because he has the dance sort of knowledge in his brain that he could speak to the dancers and the contributors a lot closer. And I could focus on working with Matt and getting the visuals and kind of setting the scene and stuff. So we kind of knew where our strengths were and kind of played to that.
And speaking of the visuals, Matt, you captured Zach's choreography and all of the dance scenes that you filmed so vibrantly. What are your rules for filming dance?
Well, I mean, it's always a little different depending on the piece. One rule I like to always try and strive and live by is let the choreography tell me how to move the camera. Don't let the camera movement just be something. The choreography has to inspire it. So it was always, we always knew that we wanted to do handheld and we wanted to be in the middle of the dancers. We didn't want to be doing anything super smooth with Steadicam or gimbals or cranes or dollies or anything like that. We wanted it to be in the middle. I come from a dance background, so I think there was a little bit more trust from the dancers and Lisa and Kadifa and Zach to let me get in there with the camera and just get around the dancers. So yeah, we tried to not ever shoot anything kind of proscenium with that Fred Astaire rule of always showing head to toe. We tried to make it feel like the audience was in the middle of the choreography.
I really felt like I was moving with the dancers while watching. Lovely feeling. Lisa, the number of A-listers from the dance world in this film is insane. It is absolutely insane. How did you get these very prominent people on board for this project?
Well, some of it was a team effort. We all kind of, we've all been in the business for a long time, and some of it was some of them I'd worked with, so then I just reached out. Some were like once removed, so you kind of would email and say, hey, I'd love to speak to this person, and then they would put me in touch with them. So for instance, I'd done a show with Cheetah, so I just emailed Cheetah, and then she was like, I'd love to, but I want Grazie to be there, and I was like, sure. So things like that. I've worked for Stro did it. So it was great like that. Zach's worked for Arlene, I've worked for Arlene. So it was kind of, suddenly we just had this reach, and then that reach goes to another reach, and the more people you meet, then they were like, oh, you got to speak to this person, and suddenly you just had this family, and this, it was incredible, because the jazz community is a community. So I think that's what was incredible. And Kim Morgan Green led us to Debbie Allen, and that kind of, blew Kadifa's mind, so which made me happy and all of us happy, yeah, we were really lucky.
Very, very impressive. And on that note, Joan, I think you had the hardest job in the film because you had to edit people like Debbie Allen and Cheetah Rivera. I do not envy you at all. So how do you edit Debbie Allen?
Well, one of the early cuts I think had Cheetah and Graciela talking for like 20 minutes solid. Like we just you couldn't cut them. They were just so funny. You had to go back and forth. But I mean, that was one of my favorite things because I'm actually not from a dance background, and I love documentary. So you had all these experts like Debbie Allen, who just the way they move when they're just talking, they bring these interviews to life. They're not just sitting there like dances, this, it's like, and I love that. Like Kadifa and Matt had such an individual setup for each person in each city. So the interviews, not to mention the dance footage, but like were just so amazing and beautiful to look at. So it it was difficult, but Khadif and I just sat there listening to every single person and just kind of, you know, you start with hundreds of hours and you just keep whittling it down. But it was tricky at some parts because some of these people were so compelling, you just didn't want to stop listening to them.
I'm going to go to our first question from one of our audience members. And there are actually a number of questions, so I'm going to pick one to begin with. Do you believe that these jazz teachers are actually teaching jazz, or are they just tricks to the music without heart?
It could be seen as I think everything comes under the umbrella of jazz, or everything seems to come under the umbrella of jazz, and that's not saying that tricks or tilting or anything is a bad thing, because actually it does come in handy sometimes, and it can be beautiful if done in the right way. So maybe we could, as teachers, I'm a teacher as well, maybe we could as teachers drip in a few more kind of anecdotes or a few more kind of names to steps, or why that step may have come about, linking it with its lineage and its history and its roots, and then kind of move it forward, rather than just kind of dance for dance sake, if that makes sense. Yeah, so I think a lot of choreography can sometimes be a little bit dance for dance sake. There's nothing wrong with that. That can be a great thing too. But yeah, I think to kind of be really creative and get into the nitty gritty of movement and the reason why the movement exists, let's kind of like go back into the roots and drip in that information, I guess.
That particularly resonated for me in my dance practice, because I like to tell a story when I teach and get them sort of seeing that dance is something bigger than just learning steps. So thank you for that sort of voice of, I don't know, justifying what I do. So thank you. Another question is that obviously you have done so much research for this documentary, and there's one audience member who's wondering whether this research can actually be made to other institutions, especially those in the UK.
What do you mean, made available?
In terms of the research that you have done, is it possible for that to be made available to, for example, Trinity College or another dance archive that would, obviously further the aims that you have in this film?
Yeah, and I mean, that is kind of the next step. It would be to, once the festival run's done, then it will be released educationally and general release, but we also want to do kind of an educational library. We're working on the educational guide. We're working on like an episodic, so we can expand from the feature, we can expand each kind of part, each chapter, because we know we've barely touched on, some of the parts that we'd love to expand on, you only see visually, because I was kind of the person going, it has to be 90 minutes. Otherwise it would have been 3 hours or 5 hours, Khadifa and Joan were like, oh, here's the cut, and it's like 2 hours, and I'm like, no way. And so, you can blame me that the parts that are cut out, because I was just like, people can't watch that, it has to be shorter, which I love the length that it is, but an episodic is going to be brilliant, and we know what it is. We have that already. If anyone wants to hear our pitch,
I would love to see every sequence expanded. I personally vote for Jojo Smith, who's one of my idols. So yes, please. Okay, the questions are really coming in. Another audience question. How do you balance the roots of jazz with and this is actually a three-parter, so feel free to address which part resonates with you. How do you balance the roots of jazz with the evolution, adoption, and appropriation of the dance?
I think you just have to make sure that you're, I think you just have to make sure that you're mindful of what you're doing. And so dance is going to evolve, but in the evolution, you cannot forget the roots. And I think what happens is we forget the roots of a lot of things and think that that's okay, which in some essences it can be, but the problem is it's been used to marginalize and denigrate groups of people by not acknowledging the roots. And so I think that's why it's so important to do so. Hopefully there'll be a time where we won't necessarily need to do that as much, but it's the time in the world that we live in now, it's vital to acknowledge that.
Thank you. Again, they're just, we have a very highly interested, I've not seen an audience this keyed up in a while. This is a question for Kadifa from the wonderful Mickey. How was it working with Debbie Allen, as she is just such an icon? Was it intimidating or was it fulfilling?
It was both. It was extremely intimidating, just walking into her office and saying, you know, do you mind if we set the camera up, and just sort of her being that physical presence. Because for me, when I was young, Fame was one of the only TV shows I was allowed to watch because it had such positive representations of women of color. And my parents were very strict on what we could consume as young kids in the 70s and 80s, because, you know, British television at the time was really stereotypical and really kind of toxic. And so it was one of the shows I could watch. So I grew up just knowing that she was like someone that I could aspire to be. And so suddenly being in the same room, breathing the same air was a bit like, oh, holy, you know. And when Lisa told me that we were going to have her, you know, she said, yes, I literally was like, I need to call you back, and just sort of passed out. So then hearing what she had to say was just wonderful, because suddenly you realize her story was very similar in a way to mine, that someone took a chance on her and allowed her into a white space, being a young Black woman. And you're like, oh, okay, so these struggles are mirroring themselves as the generations go. So yeah, it was a privilege just to be able to hear her story and listen to her speak.
And I think for those of a certain age, my generation, thinking back to Debbie Allen in Fame, you know, with Coco Leroy, you know, it's iconic.
Yes.
And, you know, and I was getting my ideas about dance from her and going to my little jazz class at the same time. So she really is a proper legend.
Yeah.
Again, the questions keep coming. How essential did you feel it was to portray this particular story in the film medium rather than another form such as writing a book?
I think perhaps it hasn't been done in film to this extent before, at least not that I'm aware of. Maybe sectionally it's been done, but maybe not as a whole, and try and tackle the 400-year history. Yeah, I think I felt like I needed to see it visually, because dance is a visual art form. So, you know, a book, there are many books, and actually one of the jumping off points, one of the key inspirations for this film was the book Jazz Dance: The History of the Roots and the Branches, which, you know, Kadifa, Lisa, we all read, and you know, it'll be really interesting. I thought it would be really interesting to kind of get a filmed version of what a book may say, because I'd never experienced it before, I guess. I'm sure other people have another kind of point of view on that as well, but that's certainly how I thought.
Do you feel that now it has been a film that it could perhaps transition into maybe a visual archive or a book? It could go the other way, or?
Well, I think, like Lisa said, we are actually beginning to kind of like archive stuff, and we're beginning to get those educational packages written for distribution at some point in the future. Sorry, Lisa, I think I cut you off.
No. Yeah, I was just going to say, we kind of, Lindsay Guarino and Wendy Oliver, where we kind of got the inspiration from, and where we got a lot of our kind of more scholastic inspiration, like the educational side. A lot of people in the film that are the educational people, they wrote that book because they teach and they didn't have anything to draw from. So it's the same kind of thing, that there wasn't really anything film wise as a whole. So that's why we ended up making it. And they're now writing another book. So in a way, we're kind of going in tandem, and I kind of like that. And we support each other in that way, which is a nice thing to do. yeah, I think we'll leave the book side to them, and they can support us, and we'll support each other in that way. Yeah.
Now, I'll make a last call for questions. So if there are any other questions, they were coming thick and fast. But before we get any final questions, I would like to know from each of you, and we'll start with Matt and Joan. What did you learn about jazz dance when you were filming this?
Go ahead, Joan.
Oh, sorry, me. I'm Joan. Well, I learned literally everything because I was a non-dancer, so every bit of it was just absolutely amazing for me. You know, Khalifa came in with a stack of books as well, and then we sat through and we listened to all the interviews and going through all those transcripts. So, I mean, I grew up without TV actually, but we'd only watch like old VHS tapes. So I watched all these old musicals and stuff, and I didn't realize I was watching jazz dance. You know, I didn't realize like Seven Brides for Seven Brothers was my sister's favorite film. I didn't know Matt Maddox was in that, and I was watching him, you know. So there's all of those really cool cultural things, but then the significance of it, because, you know, I am from the US and we don't teach a lot of specific history that we're, you know, ashamed of, and there's such a rich history. And then to think that this beautiful dance form that has influenced pretty much everything comes from these roots, we just never learned that. So I mean, I remember I work in a post house, so I was showing a different editor a cut of this, and he's British and also didn't have dance background, and he just was speechless over the slavery section, you know, people's hands being cut off because they were drumming and using it to communicate. So it was really interesting for me to learn all this and then see others learning it as well, and just what they were picking up on. So I mean, I literally everything that's in the film I was learning and loving. So,
and I think, Joan, that points up that this film is not just for dancers. This film has such a large resonance for the entire film watching community.
Yeah. Which is something Khalifa and I spoke about, was that we want it to be, well, I know it was very important for Khalifa and Zach and Lisa and Matt all being dancers to actually show really good dance on camera and filmed really well, not just like back there, you know, as Matt explains it much better, but, you know, to actually be in there and show the dance. But then Khalifa and I spoke about how important it was also not just to be a dance film, it needed to be for non-dancers, non-dance enthusiasts, people who didn't know a thing about dance. So that's what we hope we've done.
And to
Matt,
piggyback
what
off
did you learn
that,
about jazz?
yeah, to piggyback off kind of what Joan was saying, it was so nice to watch some of my crew members, my, you know, camera ops and assistants start asking questions throughout the process, you know, raise their hand before the end of an interview and say, I have a question. And it was just so nice. They, you know, they come from the film world. They don't come from the dance world at all. So they were learning too. But for me personally, I mean, it was an amazing experience to be able to marry kind of my two worlds, my filmmaking world and my dance performing history, and be able to blend those two together. And I mean, undoubtedly I learned so much from every interview. I just, you know, I didn't learn that stuff as, you know, doing Get a Job Jazz.
You know what? I'm going to pause here because we actually have more questions streaming in and I want to get them in, but we will finish off. We will finish off with this, you know, what did you learn question, because I find it quite fascinating to hear your insights. So what type of impact do you hope this film will have on the dance scene and community? This is from Joseph.
I hope it'll have start a conversation. And I think when we're talking about the UK, especially knowing what my sort of training was, that we have a bit more integrity about teaching the roots and the history, because I did get a very sort of sanitized, at times very sort of whitewashed dance education. And so anything that was taught outside of that was seen as extreme, and the teachers were often kind of sort of looked down upon. So I hope that we can have those honest conversations and just kind of start, you know, really kind of opening that up and letting people sort of understand where things come from.
In fact, Paul has commented, this work could literally be its own BA course. So you have sold Paul on this. on this stuff.
Nice.
We also have another question about when can we purchase this film? When will it be streamed? Are there any solid plans as of yet?
We're still in talks, so we're aiming like spring, summer 2021.
I'm sure there'll be a lot of people chomping at the bit to buy this. Okay, so let's continue on our story about learning about jazz. Lisa, what did you learn about jazz from this film?
For me, again, my whole career was, before I transitioned into filmmaking, was, to quote Melanie George, get a job jazz. So, which I loved, by the way. I had a whole career in it, and I still think it's amazing. I love musical theatre. But before I was trained in codification, which is valid because it's great technique. But I didn't really ever get trained in the history. I never was taught any of that, but I was, brought up in England, so American history is not really taught. So I think what I loved about this whole journey was how humbling it's been about each stage of, wow, I thought I knew about jazz dance, and oh my God, each interview I would learn so much and be like, whoa, I didn't know that. This is amazing. And just all the forgotten ones, and then you'd just be constantly, even with the research, then you'd hear something else and you'd hear something else. And I just think that is incredible. And I hope this film brings that to at least part of the population. And I hope no one judges me because I've just admitted that. Judge away.
Zach?
I think I'm pretty similar with Lisa, actually. But I think what I really take away from the whole experience, the whole 5-year experience for Khadifa and I, 3 years for everybody else, is, I guess, a more deeper understanding and a respect for it, and understanding the differences between migration, appropriation, and that slipperiness in between, which could be called transmission, although transmission is not the best word to use right now in these current times. But yeah, if I'm an emerging choreographer, so if I'm choreographing something, am I creating something new? Probably not. Am I allowing things to influence me? Probably, absolutely. Am I going to steal things and call it my own? Definitely not. And that's, I think, one of the main kind of key features that I've grown to appreciate the art form and the art of creating jazz dance and musical theatre and all of those things that we all love and adore. Yeah.
Thank you. Khadifa?
Well, for me, because I was mainly a contemporary dancer during my dance days, so I was one of those people that looked down on jazz dance a bit. And so this film really taught me that I had a real disrespect for this art form to start out with, and learning where that disrespect came from, partly to do with some internalized bias, and learning that I was valuing this art form and thinking that it wasn't real dance because it came from the streets and things like that. So I really did learn to have a respect and a value for what actually created this art form. So that was a truly humbling sort of experience, and that came about during Monsell Durden's interview, and that moment of realization that hits you, that really forces you to examine yourself completely, was just like a turning point in my life that I'll never forget.
I can imagine. We have one last question, and we're looking now toward the future. So this is from another audience members. Will you invite the major UK dance societies, such as ISTD, to come on board at the next educational stage?
I think conversation is a great thing. I think if we can all kind of work in harmony to try and elevate the status of jazz together as one, because after all, jazz dance has so many kind of influences from so many cultures and so many backgrounds, that I think in order to have that conversation together, or to have a conversation together is a great thing. Is that an answer? Did that answer the question?
Yeah, I think I'd be excited to see that it would be embraced more by the mainstream sort of dance societies, because jazz dance is still on the fringes. And you look at, for example, the Oxford Dictionary of Dance, and how jazz dance has less of an entry than some of the more modern day choreographers. And you're like, well, hold on a second. If you think about the richness and the language that they used to say, describe Savion Glover as like rhythmic and not graceful, when he's very graceful, and Jason Samuel Smith is a graceful man, but they won't kind of describe it as such. They won't treat it with the same respect as ballet and contemporary, and it should be an equal. So I think, yeah, I'd really love to have those conversations and kind of really get the British dance community talking and respecting. It would be wonderful.
It would. And as a final question, I know, and I'll ask this to Lisa, you've been to some dance festivals in the UK, in the US, Dance on Camera Film Festival, the San Francisco Dance Film Festival, and also you did the Rhode Island, was that International Film Festival?
Yeah.
Yes. And now you're here. So where is the film going? Or, as it's a very funny time with COVID, where do you hope the film will go next?
Well, next we actually go to Sound Unseen, which is at Minneapolis and Austin. So they're just two. That's kind of a real music festival. That's this month, 11th to the 15th. Then there's another one, but we can't announce it till Monday. that's a
Watch social media. Watch social media.
We did the Hot Springs Documentary Festival, so that's another. So we've had 2 documentary festivals too, and then there is another one in February, but again, we're not allowed to announce that as well.
So watch this space. And on that note, congratulations on being nominated for Best Documentary at Raindance 2020. And thank you very much. Very illuminating discussion tonight. And I'm sure everybody is going away with an even higher understanding of the film. Now, audience members, if you enjoyed watching this film and this Q&A, please do consider donating to help the Raindance Film Festival return to the cinema next year. Click the red donate button on the film's webpage to give £5 or go to raindance.org/donate. And once again, I'd like to thank our wonderful creative team from Uprooted, The Journey of Jazz Dance. And it was delightful to be able to delve into the film with you all this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Goodbye.